Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark. We're in Joshua. We're going to be starting chapter 11 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, thy words were found, and I did eat them. And thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, as we start here in chapter 11, we're going to see in verses 1 through 15 the defeat of the northern kingdoms. Joshua goes in, they take Jericho and Ai, and basically they take the middle part of the promised land. Then they go to the south and they take the kings and the cities of the south. Now, as we saw back in chapter 10, verse 43, Joshua and the armies go back to Gilgal for a time of rest. But as they're resting, the northern kingdoms now are getting ready for a fight. And according to Joshua 10, verse 43, Israel there, they returned to Gilgal for some rest and refreshment. And we don't know really how long that they were in Gilgal before the northern armies gathered themselves together against Israel. Again, we don't know if it was a couple days, a week or two. There's no way of knowing. Now, as we start in verse 1, we are going to see that there are some great lessons to be learned concerning these kings that come down to fight against Joshua from the north. Now, let's read verse 1, and it says, and it came to pass when Jabin, the king of Hazor, had heard those things that he had sent to Jobab, king of Madon, and to the king of Shimron, and to the king of Akshaph. I think so. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Akshaph. Anyways, it says here, Jabin, the king of Hazor. Now, Jabin was not only the king and the leader of Hazor, but according to verse 10, he was the head over all of the kingdoms. We're going to get, when we get to verse 10, you're going to see that Jabin is basically the king above all the other kings there in the northern area. Now, this is also seen in Judges chapter 4, verses 2 through 24. In Judges chapter 4 and verse 2, it calls the king here the king of Canaan. The king of Hazor is referred to as the king of Canaan. Now, it seems possible that whoever the king of Hazor was, that he was also king over the whole land of Canaan, north and possibly south too. Now, in both Joshua and Judges, the king of Hazor had the name Jabin. But we must understand that the name Jabin is not actually a name, it's a title. So when it says the king of Jabin, it's not talking, that's not his, I'm sorry, the king of Jabin, the king of Hazor, that's not his name, it's a title. Now the title of Jabin seems to be the title given to whoever the king of Hazor was at that time. Now the name Jabin means wise and understanding. We saw this same thing, the same kind of title back in chapter 10 and verse 3, where the king of Jerusalem's name was Adonizedek, which means Lord of righteousness. Now, in the south, let's look at some parallels between the differences between the north kingdoms and the south kingdoms. In the south, Joshua went up against the king of religion. Remember the king of religion, Jerusalem. and of false peace. So in the south, Joshua goes up against the king of religion, the king of false peace. And now Joshua will go up against the king of human wisdom and knowledge. In the south was the so-called armies of world religion. And the north was the so-called armies of the wise and intelligent. But this is a great picture of the warfare that of Christianity. When I say Christianity, I mean true born-again believers that they face down through history, all down through history. True born-again believers have gone up against these two major kingdoms. The kingdom of the north, which represents wisdom and knowledge, and the kingdom of the south, which represents false religion. The Church of Christ must face the enemy of apostate Christianity and world religions represented by the South. But also, it must face human wisdom and philosophy and intellectualism and rationalism represented by the North. Until Jesus comes to rule for 1,000 years during the millennium, these two armies will always be attacking the Church of Christ. Now, as we look at all of these kings of Canaan, we wonder, how is it possible that these great miracles that God did for Israel did not lead their hearts to submit to the God of Israel? And yet the religious leaders stood at, it's the same thing. The religious leaders stood at the cross of Christ and they said, let him come down from the cross and we will believe. It's the same thing today. We have the same thing today. How can Jesus live for 3.5 years, do all these miracles, feeding the 5,000, the 4,000, raising the dead, all these great things that he did? And how can people still stand at the cross of Christ and say, come down and we'll believe? The human heart is so depraved and deceitful that even if it gets what it wants, it will still not believe and it still will not submit to God. Jesus could have come down from the cross. They still wouldn't have believed. Why? Because the heart is deceitful above all things. It's desperately wicked. Signs and wonders do not guarantee the conversion of a heart. It is only by the work of the Holy Spirit to convict the heart of sin against a holy God and to come to the cross for forgiveness and for cleansing. Now, let's look at the rest of the names and the places that are mentioned in verse 1. So we have Jabin. Jabin calls for Jobab, the king of Madon. Now, Jobab, his name means howler. And he's the king of Madon. And Madon means strife. Now, and he also calls for the king of Shimron. Now, the name Shimron means guardianship. And he also calls, again, the king of Akshaph, which means fascination. Now, these kings and places represent enemies that every Christian faces in their journey to heaven. We see those who want to argue and complain and raise havoc and confusion. And we see that in Jobab, which means howler, and of king of Madon, strife. And we also meet those people who think that they are strong enough or wise enough for others to put their security in. And that is represented by the guardianship. And we also meet those who seek signs and wonders and the animations of the unreal world on TV or on their computer, and they want to escape reality. And that's represented by Akshaf, the fascination. These are tools that the ultimate king, who's the ultimate king over all these kings? Satan. Satan is the ultimate king. So these are tools that Satan uses to distract and to occupy the minds of those who belong to him and are under his authority. These sub-kings who are under the ultimate king, who is Satan, will gather together and make war against the King of Kings, who's Jesus Christ. You know, all of these sub-kings have the same desire and the same motivation, and it is to be independent and self-ruled and to reject any rule and authority from God and from his word. Again, all these kings, I said it a number of times, I'll say it again, all these kings had opportunity. They knew what God had done for the Israelites, crossing the Red Sea, crossing through the Jordan River. They knew all this. They knew how the God of Israel helped them to defeat Og and Bashan on the east side of the Jordan River. They knew what they did in Jericho and in Ai and these things. And then they go down and they conquer the southern land. They had opportunities after opportunity to humble themselves and to come to God, submit themselves, and to have their lives saved. But they didn't do it. They had multiple opportunities, and they just hardened their heart and would rather fight against God than to submit to God and be saved. Now let's read verses 2 and 3. And it says, "And to the kings that were on the north of the mountains and of the plains south of Chinneroth, and in the valley and in the borders of Dor on the west." Now we see also that more kings are being called together. Let's read verse 3. "And to the Canaanite on the east and on the west, and to the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Jebusite in the mountains, and to the Hivite under Hermon in the land of Mizpah." So these kings are from the west of the Sea of Galilee, and they are from the north of the Sea of Galilee going up towards Damascus. So we're talking about that whole land up by the west side of the Sea of Galilee, all the way up even north of the Sea of Galilee. All those kings and all those lands up there, they're being all called together. And we're going to stop this lesson in verse 4. So it says here, "And they went out, they and all their hosts with them much people, even as the sand that is upon the seashore in multitude, with horses and chariots, very many." Now, all of these northern kings and their armies are called together by Jabin, the king of Hazor. And all of these other kings probably paid some kind of tribute to Jabin, whether it was taxes or whatever it was. Because again, Jabin, he was the king of Canaan. And what that means, whether it means all of Canaan or just the northern part of Canaan, we don't know. But he's the king of Canaan. So these other lesser kings and their cities, they probably paid some kind of financial tribute to Jabin. And they were probably basically under his rule. Now these kings come out with a very great number of soldiers. And for the first time now, The Israelites are going to face horses and chariots in war. Now, our enemy will throw all kinds of new and powerful weapons against our walk with God in order to try to intimidate us to not trust in God. Yeah, our enemy is going to throw all kinds of new temptations, new distractions, new sins or whatever in front of us, gets our eyes off of the Lord so that we don't trust in God anymore. And we see the greatness of, like Joshua, they see there was a possible temptation for them to see how big and wonderful that army was coming against them with horses and chariots, and it would get their eyes off of trusting God, and it would try to put them on themselves and discourage themselves that they ain't going to win this fight. But our weapon is not the power and strength of what our human heart can build, but it's in the greatness. But our weapon is in the greatest weapon of all, and that's God himself. God is the greatest weapon of all. After Israel defeats all these kings and their armies, God warns them not to be tempted to take their horses and their chariots for future wars. Why? The reason why, there's two reasons why, and that is this. Number one, because these horses and chariots could not help their enemies anyway. I mean, God defeated the horses and the chariots, so why are you going to take their horses and chariots and use them? Didn't help the defeated enemy. The second reason is this, because Israel would be tempted to take their trust away from God and to put it on the horses and on the chariots. The horses and the chariots were to be rendered useless so that the Israelites would continue to look to God for their help. In Psalm 33 and verse 17, it says, "The horse is a vain thing for safety, neither shall he deliver by any his great strength." You know, if God is our refuge and our safety, then no weapon that is formed against us can prosper. If God is our help, if God is our stay, then no weapon that comes against us, no matter how big or powerful it looks, or how many there are, if God is for us, no weapon that comes against us can defeat us. Why? Because God is on our side. We take God as our trust. We're going to continue on in verse 5 next lesson, but until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.